and welcome to In Our Generation, December 14th, 2020. We are back again for another episode. I'm sorry, I didn't have the microphone over here, so I don't know if you heard any of that. Welcome back to In Our Generation, December 14th of 2020. And today we have a number of news items we will get to. Um, let's start off with the mantra, the Trump mantra of draining the swamp, even though Trump has now, I think, by now officially lost the election. If not by the end of the day, the electors will have voted, presumably for Joe Biden. I don't think you're going to get any faithless electors, and I certainly don't think you're going to get the 72 that are needed, or however many, 30, I think 33 would have to defect, and that is unheard of. There is occasionally a faithless elector who makes a point, never matters one way or the other whether they do. But the idea that you're going to get essentially the state of Texas to defect the electors, that is not going to happen. So if any of the Trumpers out there are hopeful that the electoral system is going to work the way they envisioned the founding fathers intended it to, that the electors are going to recognize that there was fraud in the election, and therefore they're going to vote their conscience as they believe the actual election was. And I'm not saying any of that's true. I'm just giving you the devil's advocate argument from those that are very fierce Trump supporters. And they have this idea that the Electoral College was set up in order to prevent just these kind of things that they believe happened in this election. That is not going to happen. The electors are the most dyed-in-the-wool, committed, fanatical party loyalists. It doesn't matter what party they're from. They are sent there because of the enormous power that those electors hold. For those that don't know, and I hope everyone in my audience knows how the electoral system works, but for those that don't know, the Electoral College is free to vote for whomever they want. In fact, if they haven't voted yet, I will throw my hat into the ring, and the Electoral College could vote for me to be president in this election. They could vote for me. They can vote for anyone they want. I assume it would have to be somebody constitutionally permitted or constitutionally authorized to be president, but they can vote for anybody they want, including people who did not even run. So theoretically, the Electoral College could vote for me. So I'm just putting that out there. But if you think that the Electoral College is going to vote for Trump as opposed to Biden, you're delusional. You're delusional. So Joe Biden either already is or by the end of the day will be the official president. And now that Trump is officially been not reelected, he's still president until January 20th, but he has not been reelected. The Trump movement continues, and I continue to see news reports and op-ed pieces calling for draining the swamp. And one of the common mantras of this drain the swamp movement is the idea that I'm very familiar with because it's so common in places like Mexico, that what we need to do is fire everybody in government, and hire everybody new, get all new people in, that the people that are in government are too utterly corrupt to be reformed or fixed, that they will continue to game the system. And what we need to do is get rid of everybody and get everybody new again. This is Mexico's every 6-year plan. Every 6 years, because the Mexican presidential election is every 6 years. They have a single 6-year term. For those of you who believe that term limits will be a solution to the problems in American politics, you might want to perk up a little bit right now and listen, because I've lived in a country that had very strong term limits. Every elected office in Mexico, at least up till recently, had a single term limit. There was no reelection in Mexico. That was the main objective of one of their revolutions. Mexico has had so many revolutions. They call them by different names, but they've had so many revolutions or so many civil wars. And one of the main point of one of those revolutions was no re-election. And that's a whole interesting story. Maybe someday we'll talk about it. But anyways, they had no re-election. So no office in Mexico could have re-election. So if you think that re-election is the cause of corruption in the government, then you only need to look south of the border and realize that a country with not even the dog catcher could be re-elected. There was no elected office that allowed for re-election constitutionally. Certainly did not solve their corruption problems. Did not solve their corruption problems. This is symptomatic of everyone who believes that by changing the laws, by writing new laws, by creating new laws, that you are going to solve the problems that are truly a result of people wanting to do what people want to do. And as long as people want to do something they shouldn't, no laws, no amount of laws, no severity of laws, no penalty of law will ever change that. That's like making a law that says that a river cannot flow downhill. It is not going to change anything. Does that mean we shouldn't have laws? No, it doesn't. It just means that if you think that we're going to put in some law against re-election or some term limit law, and that's going to solve any problem whatsoever in this country, you are very mistaken. And you only need to look around at places that have implemented this with extreme prejudice and find that it solved nothing. But anyways, in Mexico, every 6 years, you have a political movement, a political, let's say, outcry from the grassroots, if you want to call it that, calling for everybody in the corrupt government of Mexico to be fired and all new people to be put in. And what they fail to acknowledge, what they fail to realize, and what I think the Drain the Swamp crowd fails to realize, is that where are you getting these new people who aren't going to game the system? Where are you coming up with all these angels who you're going to put in the place of all the devils, of all the swamp people? You're going to find these people who have no ulterior motives, no selfishness, who have no desire to find loopholes, to use a system for their own benefit, to take advantage of their power, of their authority. You're going to find these people. Where are you going to find those people? In your neighborhood? In some other city? You think there's some place somewhere, some enclave of angels that you can go and you're going to draft them into the government and they're going to go in and they're not going to be corrupted by the power of the government? It is not the people that are making up what they call the swamp. It is the quote-unquote swamp that makes the people. And so whoever you put in, you're going to find they have the same problems. They have the same frailty. This was the genius and the innovation of the American government system as instituted by the Founding Fathers. They, because of their puritanical roots, even if they themselves were not Puritans or even born-again Christians, but because of their puritanical Anglo-Saxon roots, believed in the concept of original sin and that people are inherently wicked, that people are inherently sinful, fallen, depraved, totally depraved. And whether you agree or disagree with that theology, that was the ground, the foundational philosophy of the Founding Fathers. It infused them, even if they mentally or philosophically disagreed with those premises. When that is something that is built into the very fabric of your society, the way total depravity, and original sin were infused right into the fabric of your society. Even if you philosophically disagree with the points, it's just woven into you. And you have a worldview that is going to be saturated with that view. And that was theirs. And so they believed that there were no people. There was no person that you could trust with the power of government. There was no angel out there. But that's how most countries believe. Socialism, even if the country is capitalistic in its monetary and economic systems, if it is socialistic in its philosophical underpinnings, as Mexico is. Mexico is a capitalistic country that is socialistic in its philosophical substructure. And when you have a nation that is philosophically socialist, the socialist philosophy is that there are people out there who are better, who are good, who are powerful enough to bring about the necessary and proper reform. It is people who are the solution. You're out looking for the right person. And if you go and you investigate like the Mexican government and Mexican political system and other countries like that, like France and many others who have this same philosophical outlook, that's exactly what you'll find. That the solution, their solution, the perfect solution that they're all seeking for is finding that right person who's going to be the savior of the nation. Whereas the founding fathers didn't believe that anybody was so capable. And so they created a system that was intent on roadblocking everybody because they believed that government did not enable the best parts of our nature, but rather it enabled the worst parts. It empowered the worst parts of our nature. And so people are not the solution, nor are they the problem under the true American philosophical outlook on politics. People are simply people. And what we need is a political system that disempowers the worst parts of what people can be, and that puts them in gridlock and makes them cooperate one with another, and that makes people have to behave themselves because they have to get others to like them, others to agree with them, and to support them. And that means that you cannot be overtly selfish, or you will not get other people to work with you. And that's how capitalism works. And that's how the American government works. So the idea of let's fire everyone and let's hire new people, and that's going to solve the quote unquote swamp, that's an absurd concept. An absurd concept. And the idea that we're going to get a bunch of ingenues, we're going to fire everyone who understands the levers of government, and we're going to bring all new people who don't even know how to fill out the forms, and that's going to result in a better government? Right. That's exactly what the socialists thought in Russia. Get rid of all the career politicians and bring in all these dumb students who have all these pie in the sky ideas about how government should work and put them in charge. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's lovely. I always think it's hilarious when people are excited when a non-politician gets elected. We want to get someone who's not a politician. Does that work in any other field? I mean, really? Do you want a non-mechanic to work on your car? Do you want a non-doctor to operate on you? It's because those doctors, they're in the system. They're in the swamp. We just need to fire all those doctors. You just hire all new people who know nothing about doctoring. That's what we need to do. Get rid of all the doctors. Hey, lawyers are the problem. Let's get rid of all lawyers. In fact, you know what? If any of you are being sued, you should die on this. You should fall on your own sword. You really should. You should fall on your own sword. And you should go get a non-lawyer to represent you. Because lawyers are the problem, right? Shakespeare said, first, kill all the lawyers. So let's get a non-lawyer to represent you in your lawsuit. That way you can really be true to your beliefs. Which is, interesting about socialist people who have socialist let's call it a socialist substructure, because there are many of you who don't think of yourself as socialists at all. You think of yourselves as capitalists. In fact, many are actually socialists in their substructure and their very deep philosophical outlook on life. Their worldview, let's call it, is very socialistic. And so the problem with socialists is that they never take their own medicine, right? Socialists are always concocting medicine for everybody else to take. They're always concocting solutions to solve everybody else's problems, but they don't do it themselves. It's like these socialists who bemoan the fact that people won't wear their masks and won't socially distance, and they think that the whole country ought to lock down like New Zealand. It worked for New Zealand. Well, prove it. You do it. Why do you think you need to get everyone else to do it? If those things work, then they should work to some degree, even if it's a single person doing it. Isn't that the issue of the whole masks? That it doesn't do a lot, but it must do something? And everything matters, everything counts? Well, it would be the same for the lockdowns, right? So if you think that locking down the country would save lives, then you locking down your life would save a life. So do it. Fall on your own sword and do it. Lock yourself down, quit your job, sit at home in lockdown, and save a life. Isn't every life precious? Doesn't every life matter? Doesn't every little bit count? Well, there you go. There's your little bit that you can do. So no, the idea that we're going to get rid of politicians because politicians are too political and we're going to get non-politicians to be the politicians, that's comical. That's comical. We don't do that in any other part of our life. We don't do that. But we seem to think that we should do that in politics. All right. I also think that this is granting these same politicians that we decry too much credit. It's granting them the credit, and we're assuming that they have the power and the genius to create and sustain what we call the swamp. That the swamp exists because particular or specific individuals are evil geniuses, and that they can create the swamp. They can create it out of nothing. That isn't how this works at all. The machine that is often called the swamp, the federal political machine, this is not the product of any single person. It's not the product of any generation of people. It is the dredges that have been left over from countless and endless generations of bad laws and bad policies. And firing everybody that's there is not going to get rid of all the crud that's been left over from 200 years of political maneuvering. So that's just not an answer. There is no good answers. There's no easy answers anyways. There may be some good answers, but there's no easy answers. And firing everyone, hiring new ones is just going to create tons of more problems. One thing you definitely want for your district is a representative who knows where all the pitfalls are, who knows where all the levers are hidden, who knows how to pull them and get the right outcome for the people he's representing. The last thing you want to send to Washington is some ingenue who knows nothing about how Washington, D.C. works. I believe that was one of the main problems with Donald Trump, is that he had no concept of how things worked in Washington. I don't think he had any concept of it. And I think that was a huge problem in his administration. All right, moving on. A report came out here recently from Belgium that the Belgium health minister put a ban on non-essential sexual activities of persons 3 or greater in indoor areas. Now, this is interesting. First off, it's an hilarious headline. Like, what is a non-essential sexual activity? So the Belgian minister, according to this headline, has banned non-essential sexual activities if they involve 3 people or more. So as long as it's less than 3 people or it's essential sexual activity, then that's okay. So that in alone, that's a hilarious headline. Well, what's funny is how it's been reported by a number of outlets as being true. I would hope that any of us read that and think about it for a second and say, that's probably not a true headline. And it isn't. That is satire. Now, it's very funny, very ingenious, very creative. Kudos to whoever came up with this story, this satire. I don't think it was my favorite satirist site, which is the Babylon Bee. But if it was, kudos to them. They do great work. If you're not a follower of the Babylon Bee, I would encourage you to follow them. You can find they tweet often, and then you can also, they have their website and you can go to follow them there. They come up with these kind of headlines every day, and they're Christians actually, which is interesting. They started off by writing satirical Christian headlines lampooning the sacred cows of Christianity, even though they themselves are pretty solid Christians. But they were making fun of the things that are rightly so to make fun of in Christianity. And now they've expanded their operations, and now they're making fun and lampooning everything, including politics. So they have some great headlines. This is one that I think is hilarious. Whether they did or not, I'm not sure. I wasn't able to ascertain who actually came up with this satire, because it's been reported quite broadly as truth, as that the Belgian minister actually banned non-essential sexual activities involving 3 or more indoors. So you can do it outdoors. You can do it with less than 3 people. Or if you can prove it's essential, it can be indoors and with as many people as you want. Okay. Now, what isn't satire is that actually is the Belgian Minister of Health there in the photo. Now, I'm not trying to be insensitive or mean or callous or mocking, but honestly, that's the Minister of Health? Really? If she's the Minister of Health, then I'm the Minister of Hair. I mean, come on. Look, I have no problem with people being overweight. I don't think that people should be criminalized or mocked or teased because of their weight. There are many reasons why people would be overweight. However, if you're going to have somebody who's going to be the Minister of Health, don't you think they should be the paradigm of health? You think they should be somebody whose body mass index is well within the range of exemplar, of perfect? Why would we have somebody who's the Minister of Health who, either for lack of discipline or because of some thyroid problem or because of some other metabolism issue or whatever it may be, looks nothing like a healthy person? I mean, that to me seems to be pretty silly. And I think that is a problem that we have in all of our politics, that we have people who are supposedly in charge of things, and they're doing a good job, but they themselves are not examples of those things. The Bible is very clear as far as leadership, at least as it pertains to the church, and I think that we should apply that principle even in secular government. But as it pertains to the church, Paul said that those that were going to lead the church must be examples of the things that they taught and the things that they exhorted people to. You can't be exhorting people to purity and not be pure. You cannot be exhorting people to self-discipline and not be self-disciplined. And so to have somebody who is the Minister of Health, who for whatever reason, maybe no fault of her own, maybe it's just a health problem, but bears no resemblance at all to anything that we know that medical science says is healthy. I don't think anybody would examine her. Any doctor could give her a physical examination and come out and say this woman is exemplar of good health. I mean, uh, that really is pretty silly right there. And that's not actually satire. That was actually the Belgium Minister of Health. I would hate to see the Belgium Minister of Height. He's probably a little bitty midget. I'd hate to see the Belgium Minister of a gorgeous model, right? They probably look more like me than like a gorgeous model. I'd hate to see the Belgium Minister of Thinness. Well, maybe we just did see the Belgium Minister of Thinness. Speaking of hypocrisy, have you seen the videos of the mask charade going on? Let me show you. Let me show you a couple of these videos. These really are pretty funny. This is a guy from the DOJ. So there he is behind the curtain where he thinks nobody sees him, and he puts on his mask. Now he walks out, takes 5 steps, and then takes it off. He puts on his mask behind the curtain, walks out. Here he is. Look, I'll replay it. He's putting on his mask. He thinks no one can see him. He's in the shadows. He walks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, takes off his mask. That is pure charade. That right there is just saying that masks are a pure charade. It's what it's saying if you look at it on video. Now, I don't think that's what it's saying, and I don't think that's the proper interpretation of it. But, I mean, doesn't that look kind of hypocritical? I mean, why wasn't he wearing his mask before that? You can tell that he is coming. It seems to me pretty obvious that he had been behind there talking to somebody. It seems like he should have been wearing his mask, right, all the way up. If you think it's necessary to wear that mask from behind the stage, take out 5 steps, and then you're going to take off your mask, and there's nobody that you are passing, there's nobody standing in that pathway you're walking, you're just wearing it for political theater. In fact, they even have admitted that it's political theater. Look at this one right here.
I'm waiting so that it's on camera.
So that was I believe that was a representative who was going to get up there and give a speech along with a governor. And they both agreed that they were going to take off their mask once they started talking. Because if you've ever heard them, like Nancy Pelosi, there's a video of her talking about how she detained the corona relief package until after the election. And there's lots of them, but that's just one I noticed where they're talking and they have their mask on and it sounds like this and everything's muffled. You just can't speak properly, right? We have not evolved, right? We haven't evolved in order to hear each other muffled through masks. Maybe if COVID continues for a few more iterations of the human genome, then maybe we will evolve into being able to understand each other through muffled masks. But we haven't. So they're talking about how they're going to take it off when they start talking. They agree, yes, we're going to do that, but we're going to wait until we're rolling, the cameras are rolling, and we're going to do it on camera so people see us taking off our mask on camera. They can see we had it on and we took it off. Why not just take it off? Well, it's theater. And many people are using that to say that therefore masks are useless, pointless, that they're just a overt desire or attempt to control people, to impose themselves and to gain more power on the nation. I think that's all ludicrous. I think that is misunderstanding what politics are. Politics, largely, especially in the age of television, is theater. Politics is theater. Leadership is largely theater. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be hypocritical. And neither one of those videos, I believe, conclusively or even arguably show hypocrites. I don't believe that I don't believe that by the virtue of that one video, you can conclude that that man that represented the DOJ on that, or that representative and that governor were hypocrites. He might very well wear his mask anywhere where he is in proximity to other people. And there were no other people in his proximity when he did that. So it doesn't demonstrate, it doesn't prove that any of them are hypocrites at all. It just proves that they want to set the example, right, of wearing a mask. And that's the theater of it. And theater does not mean hypocrisy at all. Now, it could be. It could be that he doesn't wear a mask anywhere he goes, and he coughs in the face of all his coworkers, and he spits in his hand, and then he shakes hands with people, and he may do all of those things. However, there's no evidence that that's the case. And even if he wears his mask in proximity of anybody, maybe he wears his mask when he's in the car driving with his own wife. He might wear his mask to bed. Who knows? But if you're going to be a leader, you have to be seen as engaging in, as upholding the rules that you are trying to lead people to do. And that's what they're doing. Now, sadly, and this is the problem with television in the modern age of the internet, they got caught looking like hypocrites. And that works in the detriment of what they're trying to accomplish, which is putting out, setting forth a good example. They're trying to set forth a good example. Now, I don't know about these people specifically. Every one of these people might actually be complete hypocrites, and it's complete nonsense what they're doing. But that video in and of itself is not evidence of that. So I do think it's funny, though. It to me is demonstrative of what I think of how masks are being worn. I personally believe that masks in theory are probably a good idea. I think that masks in practice are probably a bad idea because our practice is not lining up with the theories. That we're not wearing the right kind of mask, we're not wearing them in the right way, we're certainly not throwing them away whenever they get touched. Whenever we touch them on the outside, you shouldn't be touching them. There's a lot of things that are being done with masks that I think are not at all helpful. In fact, I think they're probably hurting more than they're helping. But anyways, all right. Moving on, we mentioned Pelosi, and she came under fire for admitting, or basically admitting, that she stalled the COVID relief bill until after the election for political reasons. I don't know why anybody's surprised at that. Not because it's Pelosi, not because of that some of you might think she's evil, and of course she would do such an evil thing. I think that that's just politics. I think that's how politics is played. I know it's dirty, and those of you who have a inherent revulsion to that, or that's the reason you're not in politics, and it's the reason why if you got into politics, you would either be corrupted from your simplicity or your sincerity, or you'd be ineffective. You would accomplish nothing. So that is politics. Like it or not, that is politics that she's doing, but people are somewhat surprised at this. The quote, I won't play the video, but in case you haven't seen it or heard it, the reason I won't play it is because you can barely understand her, in my opinion, because she's so muffled behind her mask. But this is what she said, and this is the quote. She says, "This has simplicity. It's what we had," and she's talking about the bill that they have passed, that bill has is simple. It's what we had in our bills. But that's okay now, the speaker said. Pelosi said that in January next will be a new president who is going to depend on science and understands America's working families need to have money in their pockets without any of the entrapments the Trump administration was insisting on being in the package. So what she's basically saying is that in January 20th, they are going to pass the bill that's going to give the relief to the working class families that this bill that they've already passed does not give. Excuse me. I wonder how real podcasters and anchormen do it to not sneeze during their podcast. I don't know. I'm definitely not very good at any of this, and so I sneeze when I want. Anyways, what she's saying here is that there's going to be a new president. He's going to pass this new relief bill. And what's interesting is she says that he's going to depend on science. And that's another mantra I'm hearing in this political time, in this time we're at now. This is coming from the left mostly, right? From the right is fire everybody and hire all new people. And from the left, it is fire everybody and hire the scientists, especially people like Brett and Eric Weinstein. And those of you that follow them and like them, they're constantly saying that what we need are scientists leading the country. What we really need are scientists leading the country. That's got to be the second worst idea I've ever heard on politics. The worst idea is fire everybody and hire all new people. Now that's really dumb. And second to that is fire everybody and hire scientists. Are you kidding? Scientists? We want them to run the country? No, no, no. Scientists would be the worst possible people to have in there. You'd be better off, and this is a famously, I'm paraphrasing, but you would be better off being governed by the first 100 names in the phone book, or a random choice of 100 names out of the phone book. For those of you that are millennials, you don't know what a phone book is. So let's just say a random 100 users off of Facebook directory. You would be better off being governed by a random 100 people selected out of the populace, out of the country, than you would being governed by scientists. Look, scientists are wonderful people when you need certain things done, right? When you need medicine developed, when you need diseases sequenced, when you need genetic problems looked into. Scientists are wonderful people when you need things like that done. They're terrible people when you need politics to happen. They are simply not up to the task. The worst are some of the worst tragedies, catastrophes, evils in society of all time were caused by putting science in charge of government. You do understand that science is particularly modern science, what we now call science, the scientific method, is not a moral endeavor. There's a reason why Richard Dawkins believes that science should not have a part in human relationships. It's a very interesting thing that he has to say, that he does not want science to be in charge of government. He does not want science to be in charge of human relationships. And this is somebody who is very pro-science and very anti-religion. Now, he doesn't say he wants religion there either. I want to be clear. I don't want to misquote him or mischaracterize him. But what his point he's making is that science is not an ethical endeavor. Science is not a moral engagement. If you look at especially if you're a naturalist, and you look at what you call science, science is survival of the fittest, according to a naturalist. It is everything kills itself, and only the most strong, the most vicious survive. That isn't how you want to run your society. Even if you're a naturalist, that's not really what you want, unless you're a psychotic naturalist. But even if you're a naturalist, you do not want society to be run by the concept of the survival of the fittest. Society is built to protect, designed to protect those who are not fit. That's why we need government. And so the idea that we're going to put scientists in charge of the government, in charge of society, is a terrible idea. Go and read up on eugenics. If you want to know what happens when scientists take over government, read about what eugenics is and what its results are. Read about Nazism. You realize that Nazism was the party of science, right? Now, you can say now that it was junk science, that it was fake science. True. But it was science. It wasn't junk morality. It wasn't junk religion. It was junk science. And in its day, per many people that would have been considered scientific minds, it wasn't junk science. Now we look back at it with having the perfect 2020 vision of hindsight and say, "Oh yeah, no, that was junk science." But there were a lot of people who are even lauded today, like Sanger, who approved of the science behind Nazism. Now, they didn't approve of Nazism. Don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to mischaracterize them. But they did approve of the supposed science behind it, which is essentially eugenics. If you take the National Socialism and the anti-Semitism out of Nazism, well, what you're going to end up with is, in large part, eugenics. And Planned Parenthood was founded to pursue the goals of eugenics, which people still applaud. So the idea that this was obviously junk science from the day of its inception is not true. It's easy to look back on the Nazi regime now and for everyone to feign moral outrage. And I say feign because I'm telling you, most people would not have been morally outraged at the moment because they weren't. They weren't. There were some, there were a few, but it wasn't until they actually saw photos of the concentration camps that there was widespread outrage. Hitler was Time's Man of the Year. Now, just to be clear, that I'm aware of, and you should be aware of, that Time Man of the Year, or Person of the Year as they call them now, does not mean that the Time considered them to be great people. Very important to understand. Rather, that they were the person who most impacted the world. So it could be an evil person. So Time was not, by making Hitler Man of the Year, even though that certainly is a black eye in their publication, I think they somewhat wish they hadn't done that, right? Which is why, anyways, they wish they hadn't done that, probably, somewhat. But they're very clear. That is not a moral decision. It's not a moral appointment or signal. They're not morally signaling anything. They're simply saying that somebody was the most influential person of the year for the world. And Hitler, no doubt, should have been Man of the Year if that's the criteria. If the criteria is who's the most influential person as opposed to who's the most beneficial person, then yes, Hitler should have definitely been Man of the Year, probably a couple times, because he influenced the world more than anybody else in his day. Not for good. I'm not a Hitler fan, at all a Hitler fan. I think that the greatest person in history was the person who killed Adolf Hitler. For those that might get offended at that's a Jewish joke. Jews tell that joke, that the greatest person in history is the man who killed Adolf Hitler. Those of you that didn't get the joke, read up on Hitler and then you'll understand the joke. Anyway, this dream of being governed by scientists is a terrible idea. We've tried this, and it's been a failure. So let's not do this again. We do not need an amoral system governing society. We need to be governed by morality. Now, that does not mean that I think that religious leaders should be politicians. I think they make horrible politicians. I think politicians have to have a certain, like it says in one of my favorite movies, Grosse Point Blank, politicians need a certain moral flexibility to operate. Now, you may not like that, and you may pine for a day when we have a political system that does not require that. I do too. However, at the moment, that is the truth. So no, I don't want pastors to be politicians. I don't want a pastor to be president of the country. That would be a disaster. Be a complete, unmitigated disaster. I want somebody who is decent, and that I mean that in a very broad sense, who is decent and knows how to politic. I want a politician president. I want a politician senator. I want my representatives to be politicians. I want them to know how the game is played, Even if it's a lousy game and it's full of terrible rules, that is the game. And I don't see that being able to be changed. So I want them to know how the game is played, and I want them to play it better than anybody else. And you can call that person whatever you want, but the English language has settled on a term for the person who can do that. And that term is a politician. Speaking of professions, let's talk about school teachers for a little bit, because I feel like I haven't offended everybody quite sufficiently yet. So let me take a stab at this. So if you're a school teacher, or if your family is some member of your family is a school teacher, or one of your friends is a school teacher, or you really look up to school teachers, you're going to like this. This is going to be particularly offensive to you. You're really going to like what I'm about to say. The average school teacher's wage in America. So if we take all public school teachers and average their wages, the average wage of a public school teacher in America is $61,730 a year. That's the average wage, right? Some make less, some make quite a bit more. That's how averages work. But if we average it out, and that gives us, a statistical value that's meaningful. An anecdotal value saying, well, my mom is a school teacher and she doesn't make much money. That's meaningful to you personally, but it's not meaningful in any broad sense to analyze and assess data. You got to look at the mean or at the average. And the mean can be more useful for many comparisons, but sometimes it's harder to get that data. Whereas the average, that's a pretty easy one to at least to approximate. So the average wage of a school teacher, $61,730. Let's call it $62,000 a year. $62,000 a year is the average wage of a school teacher. I don't understand why people are constantly moaning that school teachers are underpaid. That seems pretty good to me. Let's round down for this case. $61,000 a year average wage for a school teacher. This is not professors. This is public school. This sounds to me to be a pretty good wage. This is according to a pro teacher website called weareteachers.com. This isn't from anyone who's against public school or thinks that public school teachers are overpaid. This is coming from a pro teacher website, weareteachers.com, that says it's $61,000 a year. They work on average, according to the teacher, to the weareteachers.com, which they're definitely rounding up, okay? They are, and we'll go over that in a minute, but they are rounding up. The average teacher, public school teacher, works 1,620 hours a year and makes $61,000 in wages. For those that didn't have good public school teachers and aren't very good at math, that works out to $40.50 an hour for a 40-hour work week every week of the year. So 52 weeks of the year, 40 hours a week. That's $40.50 an hour wages. That's what the average school teacher makes. $40.50 an hour. Not just for the 11 weeks, for the 41 weeks, 41 weeks that they work a year. Now, these are all numbers from a pro teacher website. I emphasize that because teachers get off a lot more than just 11 weeks of the year, but they calculate in all the work they do from home, all the work they might do in the summer getting ready for their school year, and that's fine. Okay, fine. So I give them everything they claim. I think their claims are probably a little biased. Just like if I were reading a wehateteachers.com website, I would assume their claims are biased the other way. So I assume the weareteachers.com website is rounding up to be charitable. They're rounding up the numbers in their favor. I would think that's probably accurate, but that's fine. Let's just assume that they actually that they're the ones who know how to do math, right? Teachers are the ones that know how to do math. Hasn't been my experience. I find most teachers that I've met aren't very good at math unless they're actual math teachers. But anyways, let's assume they're the ones that know how to do the math, and they really are working 41 weeks out of the year, but they're getting paid $40.50 an hour for every week of the year, including the weeks they don't work. So they're getting paid $40.50 an hour for the 11 weeks out of the year that they don't work, assuming they don't actually work, don't take off more than that. Teachers get off a lot more than just 11 weeks out of the year, but they claim that they work in many of those days also. But regardless, $40.50 an hour. Do any of you make $40.50 an hour? Those of you that are saying that teachers are overpaid, do any of you make that much money? I don't think you do. I don't think most of my audience would say they make $40 an hour, including the days they don't work. Every day of the year, 8 hours a day, $40 an hour. Very few people make that much money in America, because the average wage in America is $40,000, not $62,000. So teachers make 50% more than the average American, 50% more. I don't think teachers are underpaid. I do not think that they are doing all this work for nothing. I know they like to think that. They say, well, I go home and work. Most people do. I was making $10 an hour, and I went home and continued working unpaid so that I would be more ready, more prepared for the next day of work. And I was in construction. I went home and built tools and made templates and came up with different methods and mechanisms for doing the work that I was going to do. And I didn't get paid for that. That's how I got ahead. So teachers go home and they work from home at some. They buy some things with their own money. So do I. I don't get paid for everything I spend on making my job easier on me, or making me better at my job, or making it better for my clients. They don't pay me for everything I do. I put out a lot of investment. I spend more money buying tools than I do paying employees. My tools are the top paid. If my tools were an employee, they are the top paid employees in my company. Nobody's paying me directly for that. Nobody's compensating me for that. So the idea that public school teachers are overpaid because they do a little extra work, because they put out a little extra of their own money, they're getting paid. It's not they're not putting out, it's just completely bogus to think that somehow they have their money that they shouldn't have to spend doing their job. Everybody spends their own money doing their job. You spend your own money putting gas in your car to get to your job. If your company issues you a stapler that doesn't work very well, you might go buy your own stapler. In fact, if you're worth your salt as an employee, you will go buy a better stapler so you can do your job better, because it benefits you in the end. Now, teachers can say, well, it doesn't benefit us. That's their fault. That's their fault. They're the ones that oppose performance ratings. They're the ones that oppose performance evaluations and being graded and paid according to their performance. I've been an advocate for a long time and proposed for a long time that public school teachers should be paid according to the graduation rate, should be paid according to the grades that their students get as assessed by an independent, objective body. How many of their students go to college? How well do they graduate? In fact, I would not be opposed to them getting a profit sharing mechanism from everybody who ever goes through their class. So if Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos was your student, you should get a percentage of their income. If these rich people that say they want to fix the public school system, they want to fix the problem with education, here's how you fix education. You make it capitalistic. Teachers, their pay is based on the net worth of their students. Every teacher in their schooling, from their kindergarten teacher or their pre-K teacher. Look, you want to have more pre-K teachers? You want to have more teachers, period? Just say your compensation will include a certain formula a certain formula that includes everybody who you've ever taught. and what their net worth is, let's say what their annual income is. So as they become more prosperous, their taxes, right? They'd be taxed, and that taxes would then be distributed to those who, according to all the elitists, would be distributed to the teachers who were key to their success. Almost every wealthy person likes to get up on stage when they're asked to give a commencement speech and talk about how teachers were key to their success. Great. Great. So then let's make that policy. If that's true, then let's put their money where their mouth is. And everybody. Now, I was self-taught. I can't think of a single thing any teacher ever taught me. I hated school because I didn't ever feel I was learning anything there. So, I pay myself. But if you think school teachers are these noble, wonderful beings from another planet of nobility, of wonderful people, and they're not even hardly human, they're so divine, and that they're elemental to your success in life, then why don't you start writing some checks? You don't need the government to do it. Why don't you Google your teachers, get their home addresses, and start sending them some checks based on how productive and how prosperous they were elemental in making you. And if everyone started doing that, well, then teachers would be paid what they're worth. And I think teachers should be paid what they're worth. I think some teachers are worth being paid millions of dollars a year. And I think other teachers shouldn't be paid a penny because they're worthless. I've known a lot of worthless teachers in my short life. And I wouldn't want them paid anything. I want them fired because they're no good. Teaching is a skill, and not everybody has it. It is a gift, and not everybody has it. So let's compensate those that are skilled and gifted and committed and really work at it and go home and get ready for the next day and invest their own money in their own job. Let's compensate them according to their success, not according to their investment. You don't pay an employee because he works hard at home for you. Those of you that think that you should be paid according to your effort don't understand how capitalism works. You don't get paid because you work hard. You don't get paid because you go home and take your work home and do extra at home. It only counts if it makes you more productive. If it doesn't make you more productive and more profitable, and by extension your company more profitable, then it doesn't count. All right. Let's talk a little more about that topic, and we'll end with this. So Dr. Jill Biden, if you've been on Twitter at all, you've certainly seen the dust up surrounding whether or not Jill Biden, Joe Biden's wife, should be called doctor. All the leftists, or many of the leftists, are sad and offended that the people on the right are dismissing Jill Biden and not calling her Dr. Biden because she has earned her doctorate, and we should show her the respect and call her doctor. And the people on the right are scoffing at that and laughing because she's not an MD, and you shouldn't be calling anyone who's not an MD a doctor. You got people like Ben Shapiro, who's saying that he doesn't call anyone who's not a MD a doctor, even though he had Dr. Phil on his Sunday special and called him doctor. And I looked at a few others that he also did, but they didn't put it on the title of his thing, so I couldn't put you up a little snarky screenshot of it. But Dr. Phil's not an MD either. Dr. Phil is he has a PhD in clinical psychology. But that's not an MD, right? And they're all saying that if you're not an MD, then you don't deserve to be called doctor. A little hypocritical there, don't you say, Ben? To say that because she's not an MD, she shouldn't be called a doctor. For those that don't know, Jill Biden's doctorate is in education, so she has an EDD. If you've never heard of that, Either have I. Apparently, that's one of those lesser known doctorates. You can get a doctorate in anything. You can get a doctorate in basket weaving. You can get a doctorate in gender studies. You can get a doctorate in anything you want. And their argument is that the only people really deserving to be called a doctor are medical doctors. I think this is all a bunch of nonsense on both sides. People insisting that it's a measure of respect to call her doctor or that it's disrespect not to call her doctor. I've listened to a lot of interviews with people like Thomas Sowell, who has a doctorate in economics. I think very highly of Thomas Sowell. He doesn't ever insist to be called doctor. I've listened to other people that I think very highly of, like William Lane Craig, who, by the way, was also on Ben Shapiro's Sunday special, and he called him Dr. Craig because he has a doctorate in philosophy and a doctorate in theology, as a double doctorate. I don't know, when someone has a double doctorate, do you call him Dr. Craig? I mean, how many times do we call him doctor? I mean, if that's the true measure of respect, and if they have a doctorate, it should be named. Well, then if you have double doctorate, we should definitely be saying Dr. Craig. But he calls him doctor. William Lane Craig, will often encourage people to call him Dr. Craig. I don't think he minds that. And I don't mind it at all either. I think that's fine. Really, what does this matter? This, I think, is symptomatic of our entire political commentary system. That we spend way too much time making a big hoopla over nonsense. Both sides. That you're not calling her Dr. Biden, that we are calling her Dr. Biden, she hasn't earned it, and all this. And that's because America is like a dysfunctional marriage. We are like a terribly dysfunctional marriage. For those that haven't done marriage counseling, I'm Dr. Love. I do marriage counseling, and I insist that when I'm counseling in marriage, I be called Dr. Love, because that's what I am. I am the love doctor. I should be called Dr. Love. As Dr. Love, and I deal with marriages and counsel them, I find that marriages, the worse they are, the less they actually talk about the real problems. And the more they fight about things that are less significant. The worse their marriage is, the less significant items they fight about. That isn't because they don't have very significant problems. They have very significant problems. That's why their marriage is in such shambles. But the worse off they are, and this is just a tendency, I'm not saying this is universal or always happens. It's without exception. But it is a very good rule of thumb to do if you want to be Dr. Love also. This would be a good rule of thumb for you to learn. That the more insignificant the things they fight over, the more fundamental and serious their real problems are that they are not addressing. People tend to not want to address the real problems in their lives. And I think that's where we are as a country. We have some real disagreements between the left and the right. Between the right and the wrong is how I think it is. But between the left and the right. We have some real disagreements. And we're sitting around arguing over whether or not the future First Lady should be called doctor. This does not matter. This is not important. But for those that are pedantic, let me tell you what the general consensus is of style editors. And if you do not own this little book, I would really encourage you to buy it. It's called Elements of Style by Strunk and White. And it's a small little tome you can buy. You can download it now. It's on digital. You can get it from, I'm sure, from Kindle. I own both a digital copy of this and several hard copies, actually. I should put it on my bookshelf behind me. Be a good book to put up there. But The Elements of Style is a good book. And there's also the AP Style book that you can read. That's a good book as well. And so the general consensus of style editors, the people who proofread news articles and proofread books and proofread op-ed pieces to make sure that they are properly written, not just spelled right and grammatically correct, but that the that the way in which they're writing, the way in which the information is presented is proper. That's called the style, that the style is proper. And the general consensus of style editors is that MD doctors, and there's medical doctors, if somebody in a restaurant says, quick, my father's choking, is there a doctor in the room? They're obviously not asking for Jill Biden or for Thomas Sowell, right? We all realize that when somebody in their very most primal moment, right, when monkey brain takes over and you yell out, I guess monkeys yell out, doctor, I need a doctor. Is there a doctor in the room? Is there a doctor in the... When that part of you thinks of a doctor, most people are not thinking of any kind of doctor other than an MD doctor. When you hear he's a doctor, you don't think a doctor in psychology, a doctor in metaphysics, a doctor in economics. No. If you think of a doctor, you think of a MD doctor. So the general consensus among style editors is that when they're a medical doctor, they're almost always called a doctor. You'd always refer to them as Dr. Carson, for instance, even though the left was completely opposed to calling Ben Carson Dr. Carson when he was doing so well running for president. All other doctors are only called doctors when they are referred to in the context of their field of expertise. So you wouldn't call Albert Einstein Dr. Einstein unless you're talking about or you're speaking of him in the context of theoretical physics. You wouldn't call him Dr. Einstein when you're talking about a joy for flying kites or for playing the violin. You wouldn't say Dr. Einstein played the violin beautifully, because that's not his field of expertise. He was not a doctor in musicology. Or if they insist on being called a doctor, you would generally call them a doctor if it was an earned doctorate degree. Now, it's kind of up to you if it's an honorary doctorate, right? You really are not stylistically compelled to call somebody Dr. Jackson if they just insist on being that because some diploma mill granted them an honorary doctorate. But if they have an earned doctorate in any science and any liberal art, then you would call them a doctor if they insisted on being called a doctor. So if they corrected you and you said, Mr. Jackson, and then I said, no, that's Dr. Love to you, then you obviously must call me Dr. Love because I have an earned doctorate in love. Or apparently, if you have an I always get this word wrong. An eponymous? Yes, an eponymous TV show named after you that's called Doctor, like Dr. Drew, Dr. Phil, Dr. Dree. If you have a TV show and in the title of your TV show it says you're a doctor, then everybody must call you Dr. Phil, no matter where you are, and no matter what you're doing. You must be called Dr. Phil then because you have a TV show. If the TV says you're Dr. Phil, well, the TV can't lie. So you must be Dr. Phil. So those are the rules for knowing who to call doctor when. And I figured that would be helpful for some of you who were confused. And so from now on, I expect everyone to call me by my proper title, Dr. Love. And Dr. Love is signing out. Thank you for being with us. This is In Our Generation, December 14th of